The first thing we are going to show you is our key lights. Key lights simply mean they are your main lights in your space. In our case, we're using not one, but two key lights. One here, and the other one right up here. You basically need at least one. The reason why we're using two is because we don't want that moody, dramatic look that a lot of films and cinematic productions have nowadays. But what we're looking for is more of an informative news broadcasting center type of look. And so we use two key lights. The reason why we, if you notice, we have these key lights more to the sides and elevated is because in our particular case, our pastor, Pastor Rhoda, she wears glasses. And if you were to place your key or key lights too frontal, your light fixture will be reflected on the person's glasses. So for us, we minimize that by moving our key lights sideways and elevating them. And that will usually take care of 80 to 90% of unwanted reflections on the person's glasses and frames. Here we decided to go with a certain type of Aperture lights. Aperture is a company among many other companies that produce light fixtures for the independent filmmaker all the way to more serious productions. And so Aperture makes this 2x1 soft light panel. It's called the Aperture Nova 300, and basically it is already a diffused light, meaning it's very soft, no harsh shadows. You can also add a diffusion box in front of just about any light to make that light even softer. If you don't have the means to do that, or you don't want to commit so much money into it, you can always buy diffusion paper, and you can even, if you're using LED lights, which don't produce a lot of heat, you can even go for the $1.99 shower curtain from the dollar store. Works too. Even a white sheet will work for you. The softer the light, the softer the look, and usually the more appealing, unless you need that harsher light for a specific purpose. In any case, these lights are basic pro level. The Nova is a fairly heavy light, and it is very powerful. You may or may not need something like that. Also, you're going to need fairly heavy duty stands to fly such a heavy light. You should not be putting heavy lights on flimsy stands, because that's just a recipe for a disaster. After that, we're going to move then to our backlight. Some people call it a hair light or rim light. It's basically to give the person that nice backlight that might emulate a lamp on the ceiling, or maybe light coming from windows from the outside, and it just tends to separate the subject from the background. If you are backlighting one person, one light is good enough. When you have a larger group, you might want to consider adding a second backlight to have that effect on the whole group that you're trying to film there. The light, it will be a harsh light. You can always diffuse a hard light, but if the light fixture already gives you soft light, you cannot make it harsh. So maybe it's also a good thing to get a harsh light that you can work with for different situations. If you look at the top, you'll see those metal flaps. Those are barn doors. And the barn doors, basically, you can optionally put them on, and they'll help you direct and cut and manipulate your light and stop it from shining in places where you don't want it to shine. If your lights don't have that type of modifier, it's going to be a bit tougher for you to shape the light the way you want it to be. So one aspect that we haven't mentioned yet is accent lights. You can notice that in the back here we have these ones. Once we get the surface going, you can make the background a little bit blurred, and they can actually become softer, or they can be just there. It gives a completely different look to our scene that we're trying to present for a particular message, a particular service. And in this case, by placing this prop in front of your mood light setup, then you can actually add another dimension, another visual layer to the image that you're giving to your viewer. This is something that you could play with and explore, but if you take the time to add these accent lights, you will for sure take your production to the next levels. We're going to just mention briefly safety, and safety should be paramount. If you noticed, all our light stands have sandbags, and in this particular case for our backlight, you could even see that there's a sandbag as a counterweight on the boom arm, just to make extra sure that the light stand is not going to tip over and harm someone or damage your very expensive light fixture. So you should always make sure that the sandbag is never making contact with the floor, because then you're defeating the purpose of the extra weight. And also, you want one leg pointing out towards where the weight is leaning on your light stand. And that way, that leg will support the weight properly. You don't want a space in between legs to be the area where the weight of the stand is pointing at, because then the chances of that tipping over will increase. The other thing is cable management. Make sure that you are very neat with your cables. As you can see here, our cable goes to the ground, coiled underneath, and then it goes that way. Nobody goes there, so we don't worry about too much. But in this case here, we placed a light bag and a very bright extension cord case in front of the cable going to the plug on the floor, just to force people to walk around that and not walk into a cable, trip, bring the whole thing down, harm themselves, damage equipment. You don't want to do that. Same thing on this end, so that people are forced to go around and they actually know right away that the cable is there. You can tape your cables, your wires if you want as well. Safety is paramount, so make sure that your space is clear. You can see our gear that is not being in use is to the wall, out of the way. So what we're going to demonstrate here is why you need key lights and why you need a backlight. As you can see here, the backlight actually is doing what it's supposed to do. Right now we're only using one, but you can see a very distinctive rim of light around the subject's contours of his body. And that actually separates him completely from the background, which is the purpose of your backlight. So that's your left key light. And you can see there's a lot of shadow on the opposite side, obviously. And now you can see here, your right key light is not necessarily the same as the left one, even though they both have the same intensity at this point in time, same temperature, but because of a variety of reasons, they look a little bit different. So here you can see the left key light, and then we will add our backlight, and that's going to give you an idea what a two-light setup could do for you. So as you can tell, even with two lights, you get quite a nice image. It is a little bit too moody, a little bit too dramatic because of the lack of light on the right. However, it's still very pleasing and you can still use it. Obviously, you can increase the intensity of the light as well. And now we'll show you the setup with both key lights on. We're going to keep the backlight on as well. And here you can see then now your finished three-light setup. 2 key lights, 1 backlight. So basically that's what we have here. There are many choices for lights. Make sure that you don't aim too low and then you end up with an investment that is not good enough for you to light up the space that you're going to be operating on. And make sure that it doesn't have to be also super powerful to the point that you wouldn't really need that ever, because the space that you're working on is relatively small.